We're moving on now to basically the second keynote of the day. We are very privileged today, given to by Jennifer Williams, who has been, I think, with us for the last few minutes. Yes, she's here. Jennifer is recognized as a transformative leader in education. She has 25 years of experience in innovation and education, and I kindly and warmly welcome her to give us some information about the work that's done, the ongoing work, and what the future holds. So welcome, Jennifer. We're glad to have you here.
Are to hear me?
Yes, beautiful.
You can?
Made my
Oh,
day.
yay!
I can see you. I can hear you. This is very pleasurable. So
I'm so
please,
happy.
after my very short introduction, continue, and good luck for your presentation. And thank you for being here. We're very happy to have you here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully you're able to see that. Are you able to see my screen, Layla? And then I will get started.
Beautiful. Perfection. We can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm so sorry about the sound issues. It was showing that I was able to have sound access, but I'm so sorry you weren't able to hear me. But I'm
as long as it's resolved and we can enjoy our presentation, I think we're all fine.
It always happens at the end. Right? So it is my pleasure to be with you all here today. As Layla mentioned, my name is Jennifer Williams, and I am joining here from the beautiful mountains of North Carolina. I live in Florida within the United States, but we're here just visiting for some nice mountain weather. But a little bit about myself before I jump into my presentation. I'm so thrilled to see that there is an event such as this really focused on sustainability and bringing light to the Sustainable Development Goals, as I've been working for several years now to really bring awareness to educators that these goals exist, that teachers need to be a part of this conversation of global sustainability, and helping them in ways to bring the goals to their classrooms and to their universities. So just some contact information, I'd love to keep the conversation going. I am at Jen Williams EDU across social platforms, and I also shared a few hashtags here today. So one is related to my work around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, Teach SDGs, and that's the meat of what we're going to be talking about today in this session, and the organization of volunteers and this movement around Teach SDGs that I've felt so honored to be a part of. Also, Teach Boldly, that is my book with the organization ISTE. So Teach Boldly, using ed tech for social good. And I really believe in supporting teachers, educators, university professors to use innovations, to think differently, to teach boldly as they pursue these efforts, and especially these uncertain times. And finally, Take Action EDU, related to my nonprofit organization. And I'll tell you about my journey as a teacher, but now I am the executive director of Take Action Global. We are an organization supporting educators all around the world. So today I am a university professor. I was in K-12 education for 20 years and moved to higher ed in 2014. So I have the great pleasure of working with pre-service teachers in the College of Education at my university in Florida, and then also supervising graduate students who are teachers already out in the field in our grad ed program. So kind of going back and how this story for me came to be. And so I was in K-12 for the majority of my career before I moved to higher ed. And I started off as a speech language pathologist, so really on the science side of communication. Then moved to a Montessori world school. So if you have any experience with Montessori, it's an approach to education that really prioritizes humans. And there is emphasis on cultural studies, on geography. The peace curriculum is actually given just as much emphasis as topics like English language, mathematics, and science. We at our school had 14 acres of land. We had horses and goats. We had horseback riding for PE. We were growing our own food for our organic cafe. So students were they were making their own food and really seeing the process. We also had the opportunity to travel abroad. So we were taking our students from Florida to places like Russia and Spain. Unfortunately, we weren't in Barcelona, but we were in Madrid and southern Spain and Sevilla. And what we were finding were some of the richest experiences our young students were having. We were early adopters with technology, and so when we had iPads land in our desks in about 2010, we didn't have a guidebook or a PLN on places like Twitter to help us figure out how to use these tools. So we decided to align our work with our mission of global citizenship. So we were using these new tools and technologies to find ways to connect students from different parts of the world to our students in our school in Florida. And it was bumpy, and we made a billion mistakes, and it was an incredible learning experience for all of us. So I felt like we were doing a really great job. We were bringing in families from different cultures, as we had as an international school. We had many cultures and languages represented. We were talking about cultures and customs and foods and all of these different things. So for me, as a principal of that school, I felt like we were doing a pretty good job, until I kind of opened up to some new people that opened my eyes to what global citizenship really looks like out in the world. So I refer to these competencies through Asia Society, and you can see here they're actually they're not even that current, 2005, but I really refer back to them often. So you see here they have these four almost pillars. So as we are building global competencies with our students, we want them to have knowledge and skills to be able to do things like investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, and finally take action. For me as that principal of that school, working with students, really feeling like we were doing a lot of this. We were investigating the world. We were having our students present to people that may look and live differently from us. We were having them communicate with public speaking and sharing constantly. But what I soon realized was that we weren't doing a lot of work in this final area of take action. And this, for me, is where the magic is. So today, all of my work is focused on this final area of how can we get students from anywhere at any level to take action on their passions and make a difference in the world. So as I left K-12 in 2014 and moved to higher ed, I also started to get very interested in this space called Twitter. And I found that PLNs, professional learning networks, were offering these rich interactions where I was finding like-minded teachers, people like me that maybe in my school kind of was a little bit outside the box, a little bit of the exception. So this was a space where other people that were interested in innovation, were interested in things like social good and social impact, were joining together. So I threw myself in. I started to join in things like Twitter chats and finding ways to communicate with these different educators, much like I had done with my students, wanting them to work and collaborate with people who lived and looked differently from them. I found that I needed to be doing that as well. One of the first global educators I met was a now dear friend of mine. Her name is Lois, and she is in Kenya. And at the time, I was on the board of directors for the National Literacy Association. And in seeing that, Lois messaged to me and said, "Dear Dr. Jennifer, I am a professor here in Kenya, and we have a need for books. Students in local areas are under-resourced. Could you help?" And much like we do with our teachers next door when they're like, "I need pencils, I need paper," and we're kind of, I think, by definition in education, just such a collaborative group, my answer to her was absolutely yes. Well, I soon found that it was quite difficult, continues to be quite challenging to get resources to different parts of Africa. A lot of times these resources that we send are almost held hostage, and it's difficult to get them out without paying high amounts of money. So wanting to learn more from Lois and really trying to understand why these students in these different parts of Kenya were in need of resources and instruction and literacy, which was my background, I asked her to share more on these schools. So Lois sent me a photo. This is a photo of a typical classroom in the Kakuma refugee camp near Lois. And for me, this single photo changed everything. All of my assumptions on what education looked like and what school was defined as in our world changed. So me, an educator who had visited schools all around the world, I was working online with classrooms. I had the assumption that schools probably looked a lot like mine, with a walls, with a ceiling, with a floor, with a teacher, maybe with books and resources, maybe not, maybe with Wi-Fi connection and technology, maybe not. But seeing this, a school without floors, without a ceiling, without walls, and sometimes without a teacher, seeing that their technology of their time was a blackboard, an old broken blackboard propped up against a crooked tree, seeing students without shoes, some without shirts and clothing, coming long distances for education, my first reaction, sadly, now I look back, was one of sadness. But then as I found out what motivated these students to come to school, why were they so excited to get there? Well, I found that for them, school equaled food. And so a lot of these students, their only meal in the day, they would get in these classrooms. The teachers may or may not come. If they don't show up, you can see the teacher chair there. One of the mentor older students will jump up and start teaching. So school for them also equals privilege and hope and opportunity. So they're motivated to come and to learn. Learning for them is a privilege. So learning this, my emotions moved from sadness to really wanting to better understand how can I inspire my students to have that same level of motivation where they're breaking down the doors to get into my classrooms every day because they're so excited to have the opportunity to learn. So after meeting Lois in about 2014, I set out to meet as many different educators as I could. Next, I met an educator, and his name is Yusuf. So then as I meet people, I'm like, okay, you're from a different country. I want to learn everything I can about what education looks like where you're from. So Yusuf is from Bangladesh. Knowing very little about Bangladesh, I asked him to share everything he could. I soon found that Bangladesh was a country about the same size as my state of Florida, but you can see that population difference. It is extremely populated with so many people and thus so many students. So Yusuf sharing a photo of a classroom there looks very different than the Kakuma refugee camp classroom in Kenya. Of course, very different from classrooms here in the United States. So an average class in Bangladesh may have 140 students, and you can see a little different. They do have walls, they do have tables, they may have notebooks with pencils. However, when you start to look closer, you see that if students don't get to class on time, they have to sit outside. Different from my classrooms that are large or a presentation space where I may have a microphone so everyone has access through hearing. These students that are sitting outside may or may not hear the lesson and would have to go home at night to learn from their parents. The light quality, the sound quality, the air quality even, all compromised for these children at school, sitting on very hard benches all day long for lectures. Again, school for these students, generally a privilege, and students inspired to go to school to learn as it is a privilege. A final educator I wanted to share about is another now dear friend of mine, and his name is Jacob. So Jacob, different from Lois and Yusuf, is himself a student. So you see him standing there in white in the front of the room. And several years after Lois had messaged to me on Twitter, Jacob did as well. And he said, "Dear Dr. Jen, I am Jacob. I am a young law student here in Nigeria. And what I found coming to the university is that the local students coming out of the program are not employable. So I would like to find a way to go in and support the teachers." And so what Jacob had done as a 23-year-old law student, again, not in the profession of education, not with training. So he would go into these classrooms, again, under-resourced and overpopulated and crowded. He would take half of the students, so about 40 students, bring them into the room and teach them. And so he had come to me asking for books, just like Lois had done. I said, "Well, Jacob, what I found is that it's quite hard to get resources to Africa, but what I am able to provide to you is time in the form of professional development, if you would be interested." So Jacob, interested, gathered some of his fellow law students who had also been volunteering their time in those local schools. And you see here is Jacob with his volunteers. They traveled 1 hour by bus, paid their own way. They wanted to get to an internet cafe to have a reliable Wi-Fi connection for our session, paid money for that session, and then gathered around a very old laptop and hung on every word that I said. Because for them, professional development, much like those students, was a privilege and something that they took very seriously. So Jacob now has organized his own nonprofit organization. He is supporting students in the local area near his university to read and write and doing really incredible work. So for me, I'm really focused now as a university professor on opening up the world to my students who will be future teachers and will be leading our classrooms of students. In addition to that, I have my work with Take Action Global. I want to share a little bit about some of the projects that we've done. So this is of our schools. We have multiple schools now in different parts of Africa. We've been working with the Jane Goodall Institute, and they had, after I had done work with Teach SDGs, they had approached me to share on ways to incorporate the SDGs into their Roots and Shoots curricula. And so now we work with multiple schools. You can see here, this is on the left, our teacher that we work with each week. His name's John Paul, and on the right is Merlin, and Merlin is Jane Goodall's grandson. And so we're creating schools and giving students opportunity to find ways to use the SDGs to really take action on the problems at local and global levels that they care about and see that matter. You can see here, it's kind of hard, but these are some of their beautiful classrooms in the jungles of Tanzania. And for me, I was on a meeting with John Paul one day, monkeys just running around through their open air classrooms and stealing lunch boxes and food. So just things I had never experienced as an educator in Florida. This is one of our classrooms. If you've seen the new National Geographic documentary, The Hope with Jane Goodall, this is at the end. It's one of our schools that we have there. These are some of our students working on the SDGs. Every week, they are becoming innovators. They are the developers and the scientists and the designers. They're learning right now how to do an elevator pitch and pitch their ideas out to the world. Here they're doing an innovative practice called Innovators Compass, where they're thinking through the design process as they go. So bringing it back to us and our role in education at universities across the world, what role do we play in social good and social impact, in particular in terms of sustainability. What I found as an educator, particularly here in the United States with the teachers I work with, both at the K-12 level and the university level, is teachers don't necessarily understand how social good and social impact falls under their umbrella of expertise. And this makes sense because for so long, when we talk about social good, it's really reserved for the work of social workers, not necessarily educators. So looking to social work as kind of our exemplar and their conceptual model of social good. Social good refers to services or products that promote human well-being on a large scale. Of course, you all have been working in this for either your professions or at least in the last 3 days, so you understand these concepts. These anchor themes offered by social work of environmental justice and sustainability, of social inclusion, of peace, harmony, and collaboration. And when we break it down like this for educators, teachers often are saying, well, of course this falls under my umbrella of work and my expertise. Of course I'm doing work with the environment and life on land and life underwater and partnerships and peace and sustainability. Of course this is something I've been doing. So when we start to have them think, how am I having my students investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, and take action, the SDGs then become this beautiful roadmap to help lead the way. Right now in education, also in different professions and industries as well, but right now we're seeing in our classrooms this really interesting push from consumption to creation. We've been seeing it over the past 10 years, but especially in the last few years, which is really exciting for us that kind of come from this constructivist viewpoint. For me, though, as we get our students to create, which is fantastic, and not that this is really meant to be a linear progression, because there is times that there is need for consumption of information, and there's time for need for creation of new ideas and with our students as knowledge constructors. But what I like to do, and what I'm aiming to encourage classrooms around the world to consider, is how do we get them now to create with purpose, to create with intentionality, and to take action on those ideas in a way that is meaningful and that can really impact our planet and its people. And we can do this at any age. So of course, as I know you all have been talking about for the past several days, the SDGs for me became that glue. So as I left K-12 and started to do a lot more with speaking and writing and working with different districts and schools around the world, I was saying global citizenship is everything. We've got to get our kids taking action and connecting and dreaming big and inventing. And a lot of teachers I would work with at every level would say, that's great, happy to hear you're doing that, but for me that is a nice to have. I have a lot of other things, pressures bearing down on me. I have universities with these standards that I need to be meeting. I have students with anxiety, and it's hard enough for me to get them to come to class, much less take them to this whole new level. But in 2015, when the United Nations and our world came together to create the Sustainable Development Goals, I found that everything changed. I don't know if it was the bright colors or the icons or something about the goals became accessible, where teachers really started to understand where they fit into this work. And so, interestingly, I was at a global education forum in Philadelphia talking to another educator who happened to be from North America, from Canada, saying, this is it. I think we can make some traction with educators around the world with these goals. Which organization is doing this? Who's doing this at scale and inviting teachers in? So not knowing the answer, we sent out a tweet on Twitter and tagged in the United Nations asking this question. Well, the United Nations answered and said, we too are interested in answering this question. Would you be willing to come to New York City to our headquarters and think through this with us. So I work with a lot of teachers, and a lot of times, especially in this work of social good and sustainability, teachers are like, well, I'm just one person. I'm just a teacher. How can I make a difference? And I have to say, at that moment, going to the headquarters for the first time at this level and having these conversations, I definitely felt like just a teacher. Because as we walked in and sat down in this boardroom with ambassadors from the United Nations, representatives from UNESCO and UNICEF, delegates, and thinking they were going to look to us and tell us their plan, they instead looked to us and said, all right, what are we going to do about this? And we didn't necessarily know, but we said to them we would be happy to open up the conversation. We had, at that moment, had gone from 2 to 4 global educators, all from North America. And so we said we need to bring in from different parts of the world. So we left that day knowing that we had one goal, all of our own, SDG 4 in quality education, but really recognizing that for educators, all of the goals, just like a puzzle, all work together and matter. So we left and stood on the steps of the UN and said, let's do what we do best. Let's make a hashtag and let's just start inviting people in. And so we left, created Teach SDGs, and we went from 2 to 17 to now over 40,000 educators who are working every day for the goals. So Teach SDGs has continued to exist as an all-volunteer movement. We have been encouraged to go after funding, to organize as a nonprofit, but for us, it never really felt right. So as the SDGs are owned by everyone, so we all have a responsibility to ensure that we meet this agenda by 2030. We believe Teach SDGs also belongs to all classrooms. So we're getting ready to go into our 5th cohort. Every year we have cohorts of ambassadors that apply, and it's a vetted process where these are educators working with their ministries of education. They're out doing the work. They are sharing the messages of the goals and trying to make connections for classrooms. So now we have these goals. Now we have an understanding. I think we're really starting to move from what we found with Teach SDGs in our earlier days of just awareness, building awareness that these goals exist. I remember sitting at the UN that first day, and Ambassador Dessam Williams from Grenada received a message just probably an hour before, and it said 90% of people of the world don't even know the goals exist. And so for me, that really stuck. And I found that with educators too, that even ones that are in spaces of innovation and global citizenship, they might not know that these goals are there for them, and that they're accessible and that they belong to them. So how do we get teachers then to move from then having an awareness that they exist? So they understand the what, and they're starting to understand the why. So I know why I need to be focused on these goals. But now what we're starting to hear are teachers wondering the how. How do I bring these goals to my classrooms? I'm doing a lot of work these days around SDG 13, so around climate action. And a lot of the teachers I work with in our projects receive a lot of resistance. And depending on where they're at in the world, I know here in the United States, they're shut down from that, and they're not able to participate in our work because climate here within our country is very politicized. But we all need to be considering what this planet, as population grows and as classrooms that maybe here or in Spain have 30 students where we feel like they're already bulging, what might happen in the next 20, 30 years when all of our classrooms look like Bangladesh and all of our classrooms have 150 students in them? How are we going to provide quality education for all? So I think we're at this point, and I've been having these conversations for a while now, but COVID-19 and what we're facing definitely in terms of race relations, of climate, it's causing us to have these new dialogues, these new conversations on what are the meanings of teaching and learning and school and work, and why have they before been so distinct, where we have education that abruptly stops and pushes us into a whole new framework of work, and what could it look like if those were merged. So knowing that the work of the future, that boardrooms are going to look more like chat rooms. Here, Jacinda Ardern, one of my heroes, is a New Zealand Prime Minister. This was several years ago. I was at the United Nations, and she was there, only the second woman to give birth in office, with her newborn baby at the General Assembly Hall. I mean, how incredible is that? So we start to think about gender roles, and as those are changing, as we're thinking about innovations, and that those innovations are being used to really design for good. Here, a 3D printed home that can be created in under 24 hours for $4,000. And this is the world our students, K-12 all the way up through university, are really preparing for. As our UN Secretary General said several weeks ago, the future of education is now. So it is here. And so with our teachers, these educators, different people from industry that are focused on work around sustainability and social good, that sometimes feel like this massive machine is really unpenetrable. How are we, one person, even one profession, able to make a difference? And so I looked at this quote: in a gentle way, you can shake the world. And what I found is through collective action, as we all individually come together for a common purpose, be it with the UN SDGs, be it if we're looking through processes of design thinking, then we can really make quite an impact. So I have a few stories for you before I conclude. One project that I have been working on called the Goals Project, and this is a project with the United Nations, and I really had inspiration from a student. So you see here, this is one of my university students. Her name is Amy, and Amy had finished her program with me. She had just concluded her first year of teaching with kindergartners. And if you've ever taught kindergartners, it is hard. It is very challenging. And so she finished her year. She messaged me on a Thursday, and she said, "Tomorrow is my first day of the summer after teaching my first year of kindergartners, and I'd love to take you to breakfast." And if you are teaching at the university, you know when your students call on you after being away, you come, you drop everything. So I cleared my Friday calendar. I met Amy for breakfast. She started telling me about her year, and her whole posture just was, she was tired. She was overwhelmed. It was tough. And then all of a sudden she said, "You're going to be so proud of me though." And she propped up proud, and she said, "I did a global collaboration project." And so I asked her to share more on her project. Her mother had suggested it to her. And so she, a teacher in Florida of kindergartners, paired with 25 other teachers from different parts of the United States, all assigned one letter of the English alphabet. So 26 letters of the alphabet, 26 teachers. She got H, they did hippos, and they shared out. A very simple project, but for her, it was the highlight of her year. So I left that night, and as we do as creators and innovators, you take an idea and you think, that could be interesting. 26 letters of the alphabet, 17 SDGs. What if I found 16 people to join me and to create a project, any level, age 5 all the way up through 22, to join me, and everyone can have one goal, and we can do what Amy did with the letters of the alphabet. So I went home that night. I created a super simple little free logo. I called it the Goals Project. I made a website for it. And then the next day, I launched it out on Twitter, said, "Big news," big for me, introducing the Goals Project. So I kind of made it a thing. Had the website link, free, open to all K-12 rooms. Well, it was K-12 at the time. Soon moved to pre-K through university. Join with a team of 17 global classrooms. So remember, I just wanted 16. Learn about the global goals, meet new friends. So within 3 weeks, we had nearly 400 classrooms register for our goals project. This was in May. So by the time the project launched in September, we had nearly 2,000 teachers from all across the world, over 100 countries, joining us for the work. So students gathered for 4 weeks. They moved through a process of inquiry. Teachers, you can see here, we were using collaborative technologies to share resources, teachers sharing ideas around the goals. And then they shared at the end of the 4 weeks their projects. And so students were creating inventions. They were creating advocacy campaigns. They were creating class-to-class virtual experiences. They were creating songs, theater productions, anything they could to get the message of the goals out. And then at the end, they then shared back with their groups. So we ended up having nearly 100 groups because we had a lot of people, so it was much more than just one. And we divided them by age, and every student then shared their projects, so they became the teachers. So moving forward, we had several other projects. So we now focus all of our work on these global projects in the fall, and I'll kind of hurry through these to make sure I can take questions. We launched the Take Action Project. We partner with wonderful thought leaders. For this project, we partnered with the UN, of course, WWF, and NASA to create a 6-week project, moving students through these different levels from self to local to earth to universe to collective action. Of course, coronavirus hit right as we launched this, but we kept going. And so we were able to kind of dive into these meaty topics with our classrooms around social awareness, social inclusion, environmental justice, innovation for opportunity, and shared humanity. And much like the Goals Project, students are hungry for this work. They want to have freedom and flexibility to take action for the world and on what they believe education should look like. I wanted to conclude with our next project and invite you all to check it out. It's called the Climate Action Project. It'll launch next week. And so we're inviting in, we've partnered with 20 ministries of education and WWF and several other organizations to offer this free accessible opportunity for all. So it's a 6-week project for classrooms all around environmental justice. And so with the Climate Action Project, let's see if I can show you this here. Really cool for me, I've been working heavily this week. We have this beautiful team of interns, and we're letting them really guide a lot of the work. So we have Herman in Singapore, we have Caroline in the United States, we have Lena in Hong Kong, Abby in the UK, Hila in Singapore, and Lena in Moscow. So when you put the work in the hands of the students and really give them ownership, then you start to, as an educator, see how you can co-learn through these incredible experiences. So just to conclude, bold change can start big and bold change can start small. You just need to be ready to start. And I definitely think you all here are ones that have started a long time ago, and just so pleased to see that in an event such as this, all around sustainability and global cooperation exists. So again, thank you to the organizers for bringing me in. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Please definitely send me messages on Twitter or from my website. You can email me, and I'd love to hear feedback and what you're doing to teach boldly in your classrooms around the world. So with that, I will stop sharing and send it back over to Lena.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Layla.
This was excellent. Thank you. Very, very grateful to have you here. I love the concept of teach boldly. That is something that I would like to go deeper with you on a one-on-one basis in a conversation at some point. First, let me give the floor to our participants. Does anybody have a concrete question for Jennifer at this point so we can ask her? We are already receiving. Let me take a look. So give me a second to go in the joint chat here. Perfect. So Hari Kumar is asking, how is your view on creating model society in developed countries? So what would your view be?
What an interesting question, because it just it's quite relevant to me right now. So as I mentioned, I'm here in North Carolina with my daughter and her boyfriend. So they're high school students, and they were doing a really interesting project yesterday on creating their own country. I know I've done this before in classrooms in the past, but so they had to, create what is their geographically, what does it look like? What is the name of their country? Talking about is it a democracy? Is it like, so they're really going deep with that. The part I loved though is what they needed to do with how do they cooperate. So my daughter had built her country and her boyfriend had built his, and they needed to request resources. They needed to see who could position their country near each other. So I think our students are really starting to ask this question that you pose as well. So creating a model society, this is that type of work that I feel like it's just going to be slow and steady. I think we're going to need to take action to ensure that we're not slowing down on creating these model societies, and that we're working toward this vision of what can be. Right now I'm from the United States, so we're just in a very different, interesting time. I had, so my view is a little bit, has a little bit of bias on it, but I can tell you that I had worked with the United Nations in the last 6 weeks to offer a 3-week series for educators on, so the first webinar was on the United Nations, so like meet the UN. The second one was on on SDGs specifically, and the third one, which I found really interesting, was on human rights. And three different agencies within the United Nations focused on human rights, and one slavery, civil rights, one on the Holocaust, and then one on Rwanda. And one of the speakers was saying that we really need to look to the past to help us to take action for the future. And I had never really, considered that, and how we can look to these great, just extraordinary experiences that our world has gone through. I think we're in one of those right now. But when we look to things like the Holocaust and the genocide and Rwanda, and I mean, it's I think we need to really learn from those to ensure that we're not making those same mistakes as we're looking to build that model society in developed but in underdeveloped countries as well. So I'm hopeful that this moment with coronavirus is really helping everyone, particularly in education, to really understand that we're all just one world, and that we all have an opportunity to impact others in a positive or negative way.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I would have one comment on that, for me, the really interesting point is that, okay, me, in my profession, I'm dealing a lot with sustainability in higher education, right? But it starts way before. It is just because it's my profession and it's my opportunity to put in my contribution. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't start way before. And I completely agree with that. So there's these concepts that needs to change in order to embed sustainability. Do we have any other outstanding questions, please? Okay, if not, then I thank you, Jennifer, for your contribution. Please, everyone, reach out to Jennifer directly with any outstanding questions. And I will take brief few minutes just to close the conference as a whole. I can't believe we already reached to the end of the 3 days. This went super fast. So thank you once again, Jennifer, for your contribution, and looking forward to speaking to you later on. To everyone here, thank you very much for joining us. This is the end of the last day. I basically can't believe it. So we heard a lot about sustainable public procurement, sustainable corporate law, and now sustainability in higher education. My wish for all of us in this field would be to continue working on policy coherence, to understand that it's not just a thing of sustainable consumption or sustainable production, that it's not just a corporate thing, neither a free market thing. Sustainability needs to be embedded throughout our society, and throughout our society means in every single field that us as academics or professionals in general are working in. So that would be the takeout that I would like you to get out of this conference, to take home and think about how you can contribute also outside of your professional role. all. We have a big job ahead of us. So everyone, let's just make our kids proud, okay? With that being said, I'm looking forward to the second edition of this conference here. I wish you a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful weekend. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you. Goodbye.